The rain had been falling over Chicago for 3 days straight. Grey clouds hung low over the city, casting everything in a dull, somber light that seemed to seep into the bones of anyone brave enough to venture outside. The streets glistened with water, reflecting the neon signs of restaurants and shops that lined Michigan Avenue. Margaret Sullivan, 63 years old, walked slowly down the sidewalk, her worn black umbrella doing little to protect her from the wind that whipped the rain sideways. She clutched her purse close to her chest, a habit she'd developed over decades of living in the city. Her coat, once a deep navy blue, had faded to something closer to grey, and the hem was slightly frayed. But it was warm, and it was hers, and that was what mattered. She stopped in front of a restaurant called the Golden Fork, its windows bright with warm light, the interior visible through the glass. Inside, she could see well-dressed patrons enjoying their meals, laughing, talking, living lives that seemed so different from her own. The restaurant had a modern, upscale appearance. White tablecloths, gleaming silverware, waiters in crisp uniforms moving efficiently between tables. Margaret hadn't planned to come here. She'd been on her way to the bus stop, heading home after a long day of cleaning houses. 3 houses today, her usual Friday route. But the rain had gotten worse, and her knee had started acting up again, that old injury from a fall years ago that never quite healed right. She just needed somewhere to sit for a few minutes, maybe get a cup of coffee to warm up before continuing her journey. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The warmth hit her immediately, a welcome relief from the cold. The sounds of the restaurant washed over her, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. The air smelled of garlic and herbs and something baking, and despite everything, Margaret felt her stomach rumble. She'd skipped lunch today to save money. A young hostess stood at a podium near the entrance, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her makeup perfect. She looked up as Margaret approached, and something flickered across her face. A quick assessment that Margaret had seen too many times before. The hostess's eyes traveled from Margaret's worn coat to her sensible shoes, still wet from the rain, to the small puddle forming beneath her umbrella. "Can I help you?" the hostess asked, her voice polite but cool. "Yes, I'd like a table, please," Margaret said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Just for one. I won't be long." The hostess glanced around the restaurant, though there were clearly several empty tables. "Do you have a reservation?" "No, I don't. I was just hoping to sit down for a bit, get something warm to drink." "I see." The hostess tapped her pen against the podium. "Unfortunately, we're quite full this evening. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the coffee shop down the street." Margaret felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, another voice cut in. "Sarah, is there a problem here?" A man had appeared from somewhere in the back of the restaurant. He was tall, perhaps in his early 40s, with slicked-back dark hair and a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Margaret's entire wardrobe. His name tag read, "Derek Morrison, General Manager." His eyes were small and calculating, and they performed the same assessment the hostess had done, only with even less subtlety. "This lady was asking for a table, Mr. Morrison," Sarah said, "but I explained we're quite full." Derek Morrison looked around the restaurant pointedly, then back at Margaret. "Yes, I can see that. Ma'am, I'm afraid all our tables are reserved for the evening. You understand?" Margaret felt something twist in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite hurt, but something in between. She'd been dismissed before, overlooked, treated as less than. It came with the territory when you spent your days cleaning other people's homes, wearing clothes that had seen better years, carrying the weight of a life that hadn't turned out the way you'd planned. But she was tired, and she was cold, and she just wanted to sit down. "I can see several empty tables," she said quietly, gesturing toward the dining room. "I won't take up much space. I just want a cup of coffee." Derek's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Those tables are reserved. Now, if you don't mind, I need to ask you to leave. You're dripping water all over our floor." Before Margaret could respond, a commotion erupted near the kitchen. A waiter had collided with another staff member, and a tray of food went crashing to the ground, plates shattering, sauce splattering across the polished floor. Derek's face reddened with anger. "Excuse me," he said through gritted teeth, then strode toward the mess, leaving Margaret standing alone by the hostess stand. Sarah looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Maybe you should go." Margaret nodded slowly, feeling the weight of humiliation settle over her shoulders. She turned toward the door, her hand reaching for the handle. "Wait!" A woman's voice, kind and gentle. Margaret turned to see a young waitress approaching her, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark curly hair and warm brown eyes. Her name tag read Elena. "Please," Eleanor said softly, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Derek was still occupied with the fallen tray. "Come with me. There's a small table in the corner. I'll bring you some coffee, on the house." Margaret hesitated. "I don't want to cause any trouble." "You're not causing trouble. You're just a person who needs to get out of the rain," Elena smiled. "Come on before he comes back." Something about Elena's kindness made Margaret's eyes sting with tears. She quickly blinked away. She followed the young waitress to a small two-top tucked into a corner near the window, partially hidden by a large potted plant. Elena pulled out the chair for her. "Sit here. I'll bring you coffee and maybe some bread. You look like you could use something warm." "Thank you," Margaret said, her voice catching. "You're very kind." Elena squeezed her shoulder gently. "My grandmother used to say that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Be right back." As Elena disappeared toward the kitchen, Margaret settled into the chair, finally allowing herself to relax. She set her umbrella against the wall and her purse on the empty chair beside her. Outside, the rain continued to fall, streaking down the window in rivulets that caught the light from passing cars. She watched the drops race each other down the glass, a game she used to play with her son when he was little, sitting at the kitchen window during thunderstorms. Her son, Michael. The thought of him brought a familiar ache to her chest, but also a warmth. He'd always been such a good boy, even when things were hard, and things had been hard for a long time. She remembered the tiny apartment they'd shared after her husband died. Thomas, her Tommy, gone too soon at 42 from a heart attack that came without warning. Michael had been only 8 years old, and suddenly Margaret was alone, a widow with a child and no savings, no life insurance, nothing but her 2 hands and her willingness to work. She'd taken any job she could find, cleaning houses, washing dishes, working night shifts at the nursing home where the pay was terrible, but at least she could bring home the leftover food. Michael had grown up in hand-me-downs and free lunch programs, but he'd never complained, not once. He'd done his homework by the light of the window when they couldn't afford to run the electricity, and he'd worked part-time at the grocery store as soon as he was old enough, bringing home every penny to help with the bills. "You don't have to do that," she'd told him once, watching him count out crumpled dollar bills on the kitchen table. He was 16, already taller than her, with his father's serious eyes and stubborn jaw. "Yes, I do, Mom," he'd said simply. "We're a team. A team." That's what they'd always been. And somehow, despite everything, Michael had made something of himself. He'd gotten a scholarship to a state college, then another to business school. He'd worked his way up, started a company with 2 friends in a cramped apartment in San Francisco, survived on ramen and dreams while they built something from nothing. Margaret hadn't understood what he did exactly, something with computers and restaurants and ordering food online. But she understood that he'd succeeded, that the little boy who'd done his homework by window light had become a man who employed thousands of people, who had his picture in magazines, who'd become one of those success stories they talk about on the news. But Michael hadn't forgotten where he came from. He'd bought her a house, a beautiful house with a garden and a view of the lake, but she'd refused to move in. It didn't feel right, she said. It didn't feel like her. So she'd compromised. She lived in a modest apartment in the neighborhood where she'd raised him, and she still cleaned houses 3 days a week because she liked staying busy, liked feeling useful, liked maintaining her independence. Michael didn't understand, but he accepted it, because that was the kind of son he was. Elena returned with a steaming cup of coffee and a basket of warm bread, placing them on the table with a smile. "Here you go, take your time." "Thank you so much," Margaret said. "You don't know how much this means." "I think I do," Eleanor said softly. "My mom works hard too. Sometimes people just need a break." Before Eleanor could say more, Derek Morrison's voice cut across the restaurant like a knife. "Elena, what is this?" The general manager was striding toward them, his face flushed with anger, the mess from the dropped tray apparently dealt with. He stopped at the edge of Margaret's table, looking down at her with undisguised contempt. "I told this woman to leave," he said, his voice low but venomous, "and now I find her here with food and coffee. Who authorized this?" Elena stepped slightly in front of the table, as if to shield Margaret. "I did, Mr. Morrison. She just needed—" "I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked who authorized it." Derek's eyes were cold. "You're not paid to make those decisions. You're paid to take orders and deliver food." "Sir, please," Margaret said, starting to stand. "I'll leave. I don't want anyone to get in trouble because of me." "Oh, you're absolutely right. You'll leave," Derek said, his voice rising enough that nearby tables had started to glance over. "But first, let me make something very clear." He reached across the table and picked up the basket of bread, the one Elena had just brought. And then, in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, he turned the basket upside down, dumping the bread onto Margaret's lap. "This restaurant is not a homeless shelter," he said, loud enough now that the entire room had gone silent. "This is a fine dining establishment, and we have standards. We don't serve people who wander in off the street looking like they've been sleeping in a dumpster." Margaret sat frozen, bread rolls scattered on her lap, and the floor around her, her face burning with shame. The coffee had splashed onto the tablecloth, spreading in a dark stain. Every eye in the restaurant was on her. "I'm not homeless," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just trying to get out of the rain." "I don't care what you were trying to do." Derek leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "People like you are bad for business. You make our real customers uncomfortable. Now get out before I call security and have you removed." Elena looked stricken. "Mr. Morrison, this is completely inappropriate." "One more word and you're fired," Derek snapped without looking at her. "Now I'm going to give this woman 30 seconds to leave, or— Actually, I think I'll stay." The words came from somewhere deep inside Margaret, surprising even herself. Something had shifted in her. Some wall had broken. She was tired. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of being looked through. Tired of men like Derek Morrison who thought that money and power gave them the right to treat other people like garbage. She stood slowly, brushing the bread rolls from her lap with what dignity she could muster. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I've worked every day of my life since I was 15 years old. I raised a son on my own after my husband died. I've scrubbed floors and washed dishes and changed bedpans, and I've never asked anyone for anything I didn't earn. I came in here tonight just wanting a cup of coffee, just wanting to sit down for a few minutes out of the rain. And you—" She looked directly at Derek, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You threw food at me, a 63-year-old woman, in front of all these people." The restaurant was absolutely silent. Even Derek seemed momentarily taken aback. "I want you to know something," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. "The way you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you, that's who you really are. Not the smile you put on for your wealthy customers, not the charm you use when your bosses are watching. This," she gestured at the mess on the floor, "this is who you are." Derek's face had gone from red to nearly purple. "Get out now!" "I'm going," Margaret said. She picked up her purse and her umbrella, her movements slow and deliberate. "But I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember how you treated me." She walked toward the door, her head held high, though inside she felt like she was crumbling. The other diners watched her go, some looking uncomfortable, others averting their eyes. None of them said a word. None of them stood up. At the door she paused and turned back. "Thank you, Elena. You're a good person." Then she pushed through the door and stepped out into the rain. which was still falling, cold and relentless. She made it half a block before the tears came, mixing with the rain on her face, invisible to anyone who might be passing. She found a bus shelter and sat on the cold metal bench, her body shaking with sobs that she'd held in for too long. Not just from tonight, from years of struggle, years of sacrifice, years of being strong because there was no other option. "Mom?" Margaret looked up, confused. Standing in front of her was a young woman with an umbrella, concern written all over her face. It took Margaret a moment to recognize her. Elena, the waitress. "I quit," Elena said simply. "I couldn't stay there after what he did, and I couldn't let you just... I saw which way you went, and I ran out." "You quit because of me?" Elena sat down beside her on the bench. "Because of me, because I couldn't look at myself in the mirror if I kept working for someone like that." She paused. He was always terrible. Tonight was just... I couldn't anymore. Margaret didn't know what to say. She just sat there, this stranger beside her in the rain, feeling something loosen in her chest. "Let me buy you dinner," Elena said. "There's a little diner around the corner, great coffee, even better pie." "You just lost your job because of me. I should be buying you dinner." Elena smiled. "How about we just go somewhere warm and figure it out from there?" Margaret nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'd like that." They walked together through the rain, two women who'd been strangers an hour ago, bound now by something neither could quite name. The diner was small and bright, with red vinyl booths and a counter lined with stools. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. They slid into a booth by the window, and a middle-aged waitress named Donna brought them menus and water without asking. "So," Eleanor said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup, "tell me about yourself, Margaret. That's your name, right? I saw it on your ID when you opened your purse for bus fare." Margaret smiled despite everything. "Good eye. Yes, Margaret. Margaret Sullivan." "Elena Rodriguez, it's nice to officially meet you." "Nice to meet you too, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Elena shrugged. "Sometimes the worst circumstances bring the best people into your life. At least, that's what my abuela used to say." They talked for hours as the rain continued outside. Margaret learned that Elena was 26, the daughter of Mexican immigrants, working her way through nursing school while waitressing to pay the bills. She lived with two roommates in a small apartment on the south side, dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse, and volunteered at a free clinic on weekends when she could. "You remind me of myself at your age," Margaret said, "working 3 jobs, trying to make something of my life." "Did you always want to clean houses?" Margaret laughed softly. "No, I wanted to be a teacher. I was going to get my degree, become an English teacher at a high school. But then I got married, and then I got pregnant, and then—" She trailed off. "Life happened. My husband got sick when Michael was little. My son, Michael. Medical bills ate up everything we had, and then some. And then Tommy died, and it was just me and Michael, and I did what I had to do to keep us afloat." "Your son, Michael, is he in your life?" Margaret's face softened. "Oh, yes. He's a good boy. A good man, I should say. He's done well for himself. Very well. He's always trying to help me, but I'm stubborn." She paused, staring into her coffee. "Too stubborn for my own good, probably. There's nothing wrong with wanting to make your own way." That's what I always told myself. But tonight, sitting in that restaurant, being treated like I was nothing... Margaret shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe I've been foolish. Maybe I should have let Michael help more. Maybe I shouldn't be cleaning houses at 63. Elena reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're not foolish. You're proud. There's a difference." They finished their pie and their coffee, and when the check came, they split it, each insisting until they compromised. Elena called a rideshare to take Margaret home, and they exchanged phone numbers, promising to keep in touch. "Are you going to be okay?" Margaret asked as they stood outside the diner. "About the job, I mean." Elena waved dismissively. "I'll find something. I always do. Besides, I have an interview at a hospital next week. Maybe this is the universe pushing me toward what I'm supposed to be doing." Margaret hugged her, a real hug, the kind she usually only gave to Michael. Thank you for everything. Thank you, Elena said, for reminding me that doing the right thing is always worth it. The car arrived, and Margaret got in, waving through the rain-spattered window as it pulled away. She leaned back against the seat, exhausted, but somehow lighter than she'd felt in years. Tonight had been awful. There was no denying that. But it had also shown her something. The world still had good people in it. People like Elena. People who chose kindness even when it cost them. When she got home, she changed into her nightgown and made herself a cup of tea, settling into her favorite chair by the window. The rain had finally stopped, and the clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing patches of stars. She thought about calling Michael, telling him about what had happened, but it was late, and he was probably busy with his company, his meetings, his important life. No, she decided, she'd tell him later, or maybe she wouldn't tell him at all. He worried about her enough already. She fell asleep in the chair, the tea growing cold beside her, dreaming of bread rolls and rain, and a young woman with kind eyes who'd reminded her that she mattered. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having washed the city clean. Sunlight streamed through Margaret's window, making her wince as she opened her eyes. She was still in the chair, her neck stiff, her back aching. "I'm getting too old for this," she muttered, standing slowly and stretching. Her phone was on the table, and she picked it up to check the time. 7:30 Saturday morning. No cleaning jobs today. She'd planned to spend the day doing laundry and reading, maybe taking a walk in the park if the weather held. There was a text from Elena sent late last night. "Got home safe. Hope you did too. Let's get coffee next week. My treat this time." Margaret smiled and typed back, "I'd love that. Thank you again for everything." She made herself breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, simple and familiar, and sat at her small kitchen table, looking out at the city. The world kept turning, she thought. People kept being cruel, and people kept being kind, and life went on. Around 10 o'clock her phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, how are you? I tried calling last night, but you didn't answer." "I was out," she said, deciding to keep it simple. "Got caught in the rain, had dinner with a new friend." "A new friend? That's great, Mom." He sounded distracted, like he was doing 3 things at once, which he probably was. "Listen, I'm flying into Chicago on Monday. I have some business meetings, but I was hoping we could have dinner, just the 2 of us." "I'd like that." "Great. I'll pick you up at 6. And Mom?" "Yes?" "I love you." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "I love you too, sweetheart." She spent the rest of the day in a strange state of contentment, replaying the events of the previous night, but finding that the sharp edges of the humiliation had already begun to soften. She thought about Derek Morrison, about the cruelty in his eyes, about the way he'd looked at her like she was less than human. And she thought about Elena, about her grandmother's saying, about kindness costing nothing but meaning everything. That evening she called her sister Ruth in Florida, something she didn't do often enough. They talked for an hour about nothing and everything, Ruth's grandchildren, the weather, a new recipe Ruth had tried. Margaret didn't mention the restaurant. Some things were too complicated to explain over the phone. Sunday passed quietly. Margaret went to church in the morning, lit a candle for Tommy like she did every week, and said a prayer of thanks for Michael, for Elena, for all the good things in her life. In the afternoon, she walked in the park, watching children play and dogs chase each other through the fallen leaves. Monday came, and with it the nervous anticipation of seeing Michael. It had been 2 months since his last visit, and she missed him terribly. She spent the morning cleaning her already clean apartment, then the afternoon getting ready, picking out her nicest dress, the blue one Michael had bought her last Christmas, doing her hair and putting on a little makeup. At 6 o'clock exactly, there was a knock at her door. "Hi, Mom." Michael stood in the doorway, tall and handsome in a dark suit, his eyes, Tommy's eyes, crinkling as he smiled. He was carrying flowers, a beautiful bouquet of roses and lilies. "These are for you." Margaret took them, burying her face in the blooms to hide the sudden tears. "They're beautiful. Come in, come in." Michael stepped inside, looking around the apartment with the same expression he always wore when he visited. something between affection and exasperation. "Mom, I still don't understand why you won't move into the house I bought you. We've been over this." I know. You like your independence. You want to feel like you've earned what you have." He sighed. "But you have earned it, Mom. Everything I have, everything I've built, it's because of you. Because you never gave up. Because you showed me what hard work looks like." Margaret put the flowers in water, fussing with the arrangement to avoid meeting his eyes. "I just did what any mother would do." "No, you didn't. You did more. So much more." Michael sat down on her worn couch, looking up at her. "So will you at least let me take you somewhere nice for dinner? Not the places you usually insist on. Somewhere special." "Like where?" "There's a restaurant I've been wanting to check out. It's called the Golden Fork." Margaret went very still. "The Golden Fork?" "Yeah, it's one of the restaurants in the chain my company acquired last month. The Savertech deal, remember? I mentioned it when we talked last time." Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "It's supposed to be one of their flagship locations. I want to see how it's being run, meet the staff, get a feel for the place, and I thought it would be nice to do it with you." Margaret's mind was racing. The Golden Fork, the restaurant where Derek Morrison had thrown bread at her, the restaurant her son now owned. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Just surprised. That's a fancy place, isn't it?" "It is. All the more reason to take my mother there. Come on, let me show you off." Margaret thought about telling him. She should tell him about Friday night, about the rain, about Derek and Elena and everything that had happened. But something held her back. She wasn't sure what. Maybe she wanted to see how the staff treated her when she walked in on Michael's arm. Maybe she wanted to see if Derek Morrison would recognize her. Maybe she was curious about something she couldn't quite name. "Okay," she heard herself say, "let me get my coat." The drive to the Golden Fork took about 20 minutes. Michael's driver navigated through the evening traffic while Michael talked about his business, his plans for the restaurant chain, his ideas for improvement. Margaret listened, nodding at the right moments, but her mind was elsewhere. When they pulled up in front of the restaurant, she felt her heart begin to race. The golden letters on the awning seemed to glow in the evening light. The windows were bright, just like Friday night, the interior visible through the glass. "Ready?" Michael asked, offering her his arm. Margaret took a deep breath. "Ready?" They walked through the door together, and immediately the hostess, a different girl tonight, not Sarah, snapped to attention. Her eyes widened when she saw Michael. "Mr. Chen, we weren't expecting you. Let me get Mr. Morrison right away." "No rush," Michael said pleasantly. "We'll just take a table, something quiet if you have it." Of course, right this way." As they walked through the restaurant, Margaret noticed the change in atmosphere. Staff members were whispering to each other, glancing at Michael with barely concealed nervousness. She was given a wide berth, the hostess almost bowing as she led them to what was clearly the best table in the house, a private corner booth with a view of the entire dining room. "Your server will be right with you," the hostess said, "and Mr. Morrison is on his way." "Thank you," Michael said, sliding into the booth and gesturing for his mother to sit beside him. Margaret sat down, her eyes scanning the restaurant. Everything looked the same as Friday night, the white tablecloths, the gleaming silverware, the elegant patrons. But tonight, she was being treated like royalty. Tonight, she had a seat at the table. "You're being quiet," Michael observed. "Everything okay?" Before she could answer, Derek Morrison appeared at their table. He was wearing the same charcoal suit, the same slicked-back hair, the same calculating expression, though now it was overlaid with an obsequious smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Chen, what an honor, what an absolute honor. I'm Derek Morrison, the general manager. We spoke on the phone last week." He extended his hand, which Michael shook briefly. "And this must be your lovely mother. Mrs. Chen, welcome to the Golden Fork." Margaret looked up at him, waiting for the recognition, for the flicker of realization. But Derek's eyes slid right over her without a hint of acknowledgement. To him, she was just another wealthy patron now, indistinguishable from the woman he'd humiliated 3 days ago. "It's Mrs. Sullivan, actually," Michael said. "My mother kept her married name. And thank you for the welcome, Derek. We're looking forward to dinner." Of course, of course. Please let me recommend our specials this evening. We have a beautiful sea bass, flown in fresh this morning, and a Wagyu beef that's simply divine. Actually, Margaret said, speaking for the first time, I think I'll just have a cup of coffee. Derek's smile faltered for just a moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Not recognition, not yet, but a faint unease. Coffee? Certainly. Anything else? Maybe some bread. Michael looked at her curiously, but Derek just nodded, his smile firmly back in place. I'll have that brought out immediately. And for you, Mr. Chen? I'll look at the menu. Give us a few minutes. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be nearby if you need anything at all. Derek retreated, and Michael turned to his mother with a puzzled expression. Just coffee and bread. Mom, this is on me. Order whatever you want. I know, sweetheart. There's just something I need to tell you. Margaret took a deep breath. I've been to this restaurant before. You have? When? Friday night, during the rainstorm. Michael's expression shifted. Friday, but you didn't mention... He stopped. Mom, what happened? So she told him. Everything. The rain, her aching knee, the hostess who looked at her like she was something to be scraped off a shoe. Derek Morrison and his cold eyes, his cruel words. The breadbasket upturned on her lap. The other diners who watched and said nothing. Elena, the only person who'd shown her any kindness. As she spoke, Michael's face went through a transformation that Margaret had seen only a few times in her life. His jaw tightened. His eyes grew cold and hard. His hands, resting on the table, curled into fists. He threw food at you, Michael said, his voice very quiet. He called you. It doesn't matter what he called me. It matters to me. Michael looked across the restaurant to where Derek was chatting with another staff member, all smiles and easy charm. That man threw food at my mother, and he doesn't even remember. Michael. But Michael was already sliding out of the booth. Stay here, Mom. I'll be right back. Michael, please don't. He was already walking across the restaurant, his stride purposeful, his shoulders set. Margaret watched helplessly as he approached Derek, who turned with that same obsequious smile. Mr. Chen, is everything... I need to speak with you privately, Michael said. Now, your office. Something in his tone wiped the smile off Derek's face. Of course, right this way. They disappeared through a door marked Staff Only, and Margaret was left alone at the table. A waiter approached hesitantly with her coffee and bread, placing them in front of her without meeting her eyes. She thanked him, but he was already retreating. The minutes stretched on. Margaret sipped her coffee, but she couldn't taste it. The bread sat untouched on the table. Around her, the restaurant hummed with conversation, diners oblivious to the drama unfolding behind the scenes. Then she saw her, Elena, walking through the restaurant in civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, looking around as if searching for someone. Their eyes met, and Elena's face broke into a surprised smile. Margaret, what are you doing here? Margaret stood as Elena approached, and they embraced like old friends, rather than people who'd met only 3 days ago. It's a long story, Margaret said. What are you doing here? I came to pick up my last paycheck. HR said I had to come in person, probably hoping to make it awkward for me. Elena rolled her eyes. But I don't care. I did the right thing. Sit with me, Margaret said impulsively. Please, I need to tell you something. Elena slid into the booth, looking at the elegant table setting with raised eyebrows. Fancy? How'd you score this table? That's part of what I need to tell you. Margaret hesitated. My son owns this restaurant. Well, his company does. He's Michael Chen, the founder of SaverTech. Elena's jaw dropped. Wait, your son is Michael Chen. The Michael Chen. The same. But you said, you were... Eleanor shook her head in amazement. You were cleaning houses. You took the bus. I don't like to depend on my son's money, Margaret said. I never have. He's offered me everything, a house, a car, financial support. I've always said no. I want to make my own way. Elena was staring at her like she was seeing her for the first time. And now he owns the restaurant where Derek Morrison threw bread at you. Yes, and he knows about what happened. He does now. He's in Derek's office as we speak. Elena leaned back in the booth, a slow smile spreading across her face. I would pay a lot of money to be a fly on that wall. In Derek Morrison's small, cluttered office, the atmosphere was very different. Michael stood with his arms crossed, his back to the door, while Derek sat behind his desk, his face pale and sweating. "Mr. Chen, I assure you there must be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." Michael's voice was ice. "My mother told me exactly what happened, every detail, and I believe her. I don't know what she thinks she saw, but I would never—" "Stop!" Michael held up a hand. "I'm not interested in excuses. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm interested in one thing. The truth." He paused. "Did you or did you not tell an elderly woman, my mother, to leave this restaurant on Friday night because she didn't fit your idea of what a real customer looks like?" Derek's mouth opened and closed. "I may have suggested that she would be more comfortable elsewhere." "Did you dump a basket of bread on her lap?" Silence. "Did you call her a homeless person? Did you say she looked like she'd been sleeping in a dumpster?" More silence, but Derek's face had gone from pale to grey. "My mother has worked harder than anyone I've ever known," Michael continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She raised me alone after my father died. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. She never asked anyone for help, never complained, never gave up. And you," he pointed at Derek, "you threw food at her. Because she wasn't dressed the way you thought a customer should be dressed." "I didn't know who she was," Derek blurted out. "How was I supposed to know she was your mother?" "That's exactly the point." Michael leaned forward, placing his hands on Derek's desk. "You shouldn't have needed to know who she was. She was a human being who came in out of the rain. She asked for coffee, and you treated her like garbage." "I was trying to maintain standards." "Standards?" Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your standards are why this restaurant has a 3.2 rating on Yelp. Your standards are why staff turnover is 60% annually. Your standards are why we've had 4 discrimination complaints filed in the past 6 months. He straightened up. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I bought this chain without doing my research?" Derek's face had gone completely white. "I can explain." "You're done explaining. You're done here, period." Michael walked to the door and opened it. "Security will escort you out. You'll receive your final paycheck in the mail. Don't bother asking for a reference." "You can't do this. I've worked here for 15 years. "And in those 15 years, how many people like my mother have you humiliated? How many employees have you bullied and degraded? How many people have walked out of here feeling like they were nothing?" Michael shook his head. 15 years of treating people like dirt ends tonight." 2 security guards appeared in the doorway, summoned by a text Michael had sent before entering the office. "Please escort Mr. Morrison out of the building," Michael said. "Make sure he doesn't take anything that belongs to the company." "This isn't over," Derek snarled as the guards flanked him. "I'll sue. I'll go to the media." "Go ahead," Michael said calmly. "Tell them exactly what you did. Tell them you threw food at a 63-year-old widow because she didn't look rich enough to eat here. I'm sure that will play really well." Derek was still protesting as the guards led him away, but Michael had already turned his back, walking back toward the dining room. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd never enjoyed confrontation, but there was a fierce satisfaction burning in his chest. No one treated his mother that way, no one. When he returned to the table, he found Margaret sitting with a young woman he didn't recognize. They were laughing at something, their heads close together, and for a moment Michael just stood and watched. His mother looked happy, happier than he'd seen her in a long time. "Mom?" Margaret looked up. "Michael, come sit down. There's someone I want you to meet." Michael slid into the booth across from the young woman. "I'm Michael Chen." "Elena Rodriguez." She shook his hand, her grip firm. "I'm the one who quit on Friday after your manager threw food at your mom." Michael's eyebrows rose. "You're Elena? Mom told me about you." She told me about you too, though not the part about you being a billionaire tech mogul until about 5 minutes ago. I'm not a billionaire. He is, Margaret said. He just doesn't like to say it. Michael sighed. Mom. What happened with Derek? Elena asked, leaning forward. We saw security take him out. He's been terminated, effective immediately. Elena pumped her fist in the air. Yes, sorry, I know that's unprofessional, but that man made my life miserable for 2 years. Then maybe you'd like your job back, with a raise and a new manager once we find one. Elena stared at him. Are you serious? Completely. Anyone who stood up for my mother when no one else would is someone I want on my team. Elena looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. What do you say? It's your choice? Elena shook her head, overwhelmed. I mean, yes, definitely. But I'm also in nursing school, so my hours... We'll work around your schedule, Michael said. Whatever you need. Elena laughed, tears suddenly springing to her eyes. This is insane. 3 days ago I lost my job because I gave a woman in a wet coat a cup of coffee, and now I'm getting it back with a raise from that woman's billionaire son. Life is strange that way, Margaret said, reaching across the table to squeeze Elena's hand. Kindness has a way of coming back around. They stayed at the restaurant for hours, the three of them. Michael ordered food, real food, appetizers and entrees and desserts, everything on the menu that looked good. Elena tried to protest, but Michael insisted, consider it a welcome-back dinner. As they ate, Michael told them his plans for the restaurant chain. He wanted to completely overhaul the corporate culture, get rid of managers like Derek, implement new training programs focused on customer service and respect. He wanted every person who walked through the door to feel welcome, regardless of what they were wearing or what they looked like. It's going to take time, he admitted. This kind of rot goes deep, but I'm committed to making it happen. Your father would be proud, Margaret said quietly. He always said that how you treat people when you don't have to be nice to them is the true measure of your character. Michael nodded, his throat tight. I think about him a lot, about the lessons he taught me, about the man he was. He was a good man, the best. They were all quiet for a moment, connected by something deeper than the food and wine on the table. Then Elena raised her glass. To good people, she said, and to kindness finding its way back where it belongs. They clinked their glasses together, and Margaret felt something shift in her heart. All those years of struggling, of working, of keeping her head down and pushing through, maybe it hadn't been for nothing. Maybe it had all led here, to this moment, to this table, to these people who reminded her that the world could still surprise you in the best ways. After dinner, Michael drove Elena home first, then took his mother back to her apartment. He walked her to her door, like he always did, and hugged her tight. I'm sorry that happened to you, Mom. I'm sorry I wasn't there. You were there, Margaret said. You're always there. I want you to move into the house, please. I worry about you. Margaret smiled, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. I'll think about it. Really think about it this time. That's all I ask. He kissed her forehead and waited until she was inside with the door locked before heading back to the car. As Margaret watched him drive away, she felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. The next few weeks brought changes that Margaret could never have anticipated. Michael made good on his promise to reform the Golden Fork and the rest of the restaurant chain. He promoted Elena to shift supervisor, and she threw herself into the role with energy and dedication, even as she continued her nursing studies. The two women met for coffee every week, their friendship deepening with each conversation. Margaret finally agreed to move into the house Michael had bought her, not because she'd given up on her independence, but because she'd realized that accepting help from people who loved her wasn't weakness. It was grace. The house was beautiful, with a garden that she immediately began planning to fill with flowers and a view of the lake that reminded her of childhood summers in Michigan. She still cleaned houses, but only twice a week now, and only for clients she genuinely enjoyed. The rest of her time she spent volunteering at a local community center, helping other seniors with their taxes and paperwork, sharing the hard-won wisdom of a life fully lived. One evening in early spring, Margaret was sitting on her new porch, watching the sun set over the lake, when her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Check the news!" Margaret opened her browser and searched for whatever Elena was talking about. It didn't take long to find it. The story was everywhere. Savertech CEO Michael Chen had been named one of the country's top business leaders under 40, but it wasn't his business acumen that had caught the media's attention. It was his story. His story of growing up poor, of a widowed mother who worked 3 jobs to keep him fed, of scholarships and ramen noodles and building an empire from nothing. And woven through the article was another story. The story of Derek Morrison, the restaurant manager who had thrown food at an elderly woman, not knowing she was the mother of the man who would soon own his restaurant. The story had leaked somehow. Maybe from one of the staff who'd witnessed the confrontation, maybe from Derek himself in a misguided attempt at revenge. But instead of damaging Michael or the company, it had become something else entirely. It had become a story about karma, about justice, about the consequences of cruelty. The article included a quote from Michael. "My mother taught me everything I know about hard work and dignity. When I found out how she'd been treated, I knew I had to act. Not because she's my mother, although that certainly added fuel to the fire, but because no one deserves to be humiliated for being less than wealthy. My mother has worked harder than most people will ever know. She's my hero. And anyone who disrespects her disrespects the values that this company is built on." Margaret read the article 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she called Michael. "I saw it," she said when he answered. "I saw what you said. Are you okay with it? I should have asked before I spoke to the reporter, but it all happened so fast." "I'm more than okay with it." Margaret looked out at the lake, where the last rays of sunlight were painting the water gold. "I'm proud of you, of everything you've become. Everything I've become is because of you, Mom. No, you became who you are because of who you chose to be. I just gave you a foundation. You built the house." Michael was quiet for a moment. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now go run your company. I'll see you Sunday for dinner." She hung up and sat for a long time in the gathering darkness, thinking about all the roads that had led to this moment. The struggles, the sacrifices, the endless days of work, the nights she'd cried after Michael went to bed, wondering how she would pay the rent. The pride she'd felt watching him graduate, watching him succeed, watching him become a man his father would have been proud of. And she thought about Derek Morrison wherever he was now. She didn't feel angry anymore. She'd let go of that somewhere along the way. Mostly she just felt sad for him. Sad that he'd lived his life believing that power came from putting others down. Sad that he'd never learned what her grandmother had taught her so many years ago, that true strength comes from lifting people up. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Elena. "You're famous, but more importantly, did you see the part about the foundation?" Margaret scrolled back through the article until she found it. Buried near the end was an announcement. Michael was launching a new foundation in his mother's name. The Margaret Sullivan Foundation, dedicated to providing scholarships and support for single parents pursuing education and career advancement. Every day, single parents across this country are doing what my mother did, sacrificing everything for their children's futures while pursuing their own dreams. Michael was quoted as saying, "This foundation will help them, because no one should have to choose between their children's needs and their own potential." Margaret set down her phone and wept, not from sadness this time, but from a joy so profound it felt like it might lift her right off the porch and into the evening sky. All those years, all that struggle, all that sacrifice, it had meant something. It was still meaning something, rippling outward into the world in ways she could never have imagined. The doorbell rang, startling her out of her reverie. She wiped her eyes and went to answer it, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a delivery. It was Elena, standing on the porch with a bottle of wine and a huge grin. "I hope you don't mind me showing up uninvited," Elena said, "but I figured tonight was a night for celebrating. Also, I brought news." Margaret ushered her in, hugging her tight. "What news?" "I got accepted Into the nursing program, the competitive one, the one I didn't think I had a chance at. Elena was practically bouncing. They called this afternoon, full scholarship starting in the fall. Idlina, that's wonderful. I know. And the crazy thing is, I think it might have been because of the story. You know, about standing up for you at the restaurant. The admissions committee saw it somehow, and they said it showed exceptional moral character. Can you believe it? Margaret led her to the kitchen, pulling out glasses for the wine. I can absolutely believe it. I told you, kindness comes back around. They toasted each other, the wine golden in the lamplight, and talked until late into the night. About nursing school and the foundation, about Margaret's new garden and Elena's plans for the future, about the strange winding paths that had brought them together, two strangers in a rainstorm who had become something like family. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said as the night grew late. "Of course. Are you happy? I mean really happy after everything that happened?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "You know, I think I am. I didn't expect to be, not at this stage of my life. I thought happiness was something you chased when you were young, and then you just sort of settled, made peace with what you had." She smiled. "But I was wrong. Happiness can find you at any age. You just have to be open to it." "I think you're right," Elena said. "I think I'm starting to figure that out too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night, crickets chirping, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the soft rustle of wind through the new leaves on the trees. Margaret thought about all the people she'd known over the years, all the kindnesses she'd received and given, all the moments that had seemed small at the time, but had turned out to be the building blocks of a life worth living. "You know what I've learned?" she said finally. "What?" "That the way you treat people, all people, not just the ones who can do something for you, that's what defines you. It's not your job or your money or your status. It's how you make others feel when they're at their most vulnerable." Elena nodded slowly. "Derek Morrison never learned that lesson." "No, he didn't. And I hope someday he will, not for my sake, but for his, because living with that kind of bitterness, it's its own punishment." "You're more forgiving than I would be." Margaret shrugged. "Life's too short for grudges, and besides, holding on to anger only hurts the person doing the holding." Elena raised her glass one more time. "To letting go, then. To letting go." The months that followed were among the best of Margaret's life. The Margaret Sullivan Foundation launched to enormous success, providing scholarships to over 200 single parents in its first year alone. Margaret herself became involved in the selection process, reading applications and meeting with recipients, sharing her story and listening to theirs. One afternoon, she was at the foundation office, a bright, modern space that Michael had insisted on naming after her, reviewing applications when one caught her eye. The applicant was a young mother named Sarah, 28 years old, working as a hostess at a restaurant while trying to get her GED. The name of the restaurant made Margaret pause. The Golden Fork. She read Sarah's essay 3 times. It was about growing up poor, about watching her mother struggle, about wanting to break the cycle for her own daughter, about a night at work when she'd seen her manager humiliate an elderly woman, and how she'd been too afraid to say anything, and how the guilt of that silence had haunted her ever since. "I think about that woman every day," Sarah had written. "I think about how I stood there and watched while she was treated like garbage. I didn't know who she was then. I didn't know she was the mother of the man who now owns the restaurant, or that her story would end up in the news. All I knew was that she was a human being who deserved better, and I failed her. What I want more than anything," the essay continued, "is to be the kind of person who speaks up, the kind of person who does the right thing, even when it's hard, the kind of person that woman deserved that night." Margaret put down the application and wiped her eyes. Then she picked up the phone and called Michael. "I have a scholarship recipient I want to personally sponsor," she said, "and I think you should meet her." Sarah came to the office a week later, nervous and wide-eyed, clutching her daughter's hand. She was the young hostess from that night. Margaret recognized her immediately, though the girl looked different now, less polished, more real, more scared. "Mrs. Sullivan," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." Margaret held up a hand. "Don't apologize. You were young and scared and doing what you thought you had to do to keep your job. I understand. But I should have. What you should have done is in the past. What matters now is what you do next." Margaret gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Tell me about your daughter." Sarah sat, pulling her daughter, a beautiful 4-year-old named Emma, onto her lap, and she told Margaret everything. About dropping out of high school when she got pregnant, about the baby's father leaving, about working double shifts to pay for daycare, about the endless cycle of exhaustion and poverty, about the dream of giving Emma a better life. "I want to finish my education," Sarah said. "I want to go to college, get a real career. I want Emma to grow up seeing her mother succeed, not just survive." Margaret nodded slowly. "The scholarship will cover your tuition and books, but I want to offer you something more." "More?" "A job, here at the foundation. Part-time to start while you finish your GED. You'll be helping with outreach, talking to other young mothers like yourself, sharing your story, showing them that it's possible to change their lives." Sarah stared at her, uncomprehending. "You want to give me a job? After what I want to give you a chance," Margaret said. "The same kind of chance I was never given. The kind of chance that could have changed my life if someone had offered it to me 40 years ago." Sarah burst into tears, and Emma looked up at her mother with concern. "Mama, why are you crying?" "Because I'm happy, baby. Mama's so happy." Margaret reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "We all make mistakes. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is what we do next." And what Sarah did next was extraordinary. She threw herself into her studies, earning her GED in 6 months and enrolling in community college the following fall. She became one of the Foundation's most effective advocates, speaking at schools and community centers about her journey from high school dropout to scholarship recipient. Emma thrived, growing into a curious, confident child who loved to read and draw and ask questions about everything. 3 years later, Sarah graduated with a degree in social work. Margaret was in the audience, sitting next to Michael and Elena, who had long since completed her nursing degree and was now working at a children's hospital, watching as Sarah walked across the stage to receive her diploma. When Sarah's name was called, she looked out at the crowd and found Margaret's eyes, and the smile they shared needed no words. Afterward, at the celebration dinner, Sarah stood and raised her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said, "to the woman who changed my life. Mrs. Sullivan, you could have held a grudge against me. You could have rejected my application, refused to help, told me I didn't deserve it. But instead, you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You saw the person I could become, and you gave me the chance to become her." Margaret felt Michael's hand on her shoulder, saw Elena's teary smile, watched as Sarah's daughter Emma waved enthusiastically from her seat. "I'm still learning from you," Sarah continued. "Every day I try to see people the way you see them, not for their mistakes, but for their potential, not for where they've been, but for where they could go." She took a deep breath. "To Margaret Sullivan, the greatest teacher I've ever had." Everyone drank, and Margaret found herself standing, walking around the table to embrace Sarah. They held each other for a long moment, two women whose lives had intersected in the worst possible way and had been transformed into something beautiful. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen." The evening wound down, guests departing with full hearts and warm goodbyes. Michael drove Margaret home, the city lights twinkling around them as they crossed the bridge toward her house by the lake. "You changed her life," Michael said quietly. "She changed her own life. I just opened a door." "That's what you do, Mom. You open doors for people. You've been doing it your whole life." Margaret looked out the window at the lights on the water. "I never thought of it that way." "I know. That's what makes you so remarkable." Michael pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" The foundation, the board voted today. They want to expand, open chapters in 10 more cities by the end of next year. It's going to help thousands of people, Mum. Tens of thousands eventually. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes again. She'd cried more in the past few years than in the previous 40 combined. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just know that all of this started with you, with the person you've always been, with the kindness you've always shown. Michael reached over and took her hand. Dad would be so proud of you. He would be proud of you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. They sat in the car for a while, holding hands in the darkness, saying nothing. Finally, Margaret squeezed his hand and reached for the door. Come in for tea. Always. They walked into the house together, mother and son, and Margaret put the kettle on while Michael settled into his favorite chair. The house was quiet, peaceful, filled with the small evidences of a life well lived, photos on the walls, books on the shelves, a vase of flowers from the garden on the windowsill. Mom? Yes? Do you ever think about that night? The night at the restaurant? Margaret considered the question as she measured tea leaves into the pot. Sometimes, not as often as I used to. What do you think about? I think about how much it hurt, how humiliated I felt. She poured the hot water, watching the steam rise, but I also think about how it led to everything else. Meeting Eleanor, the foundation, Sarah, all of it. So you don't regret it? I regret that it happened, but I don't regret who I became because of it. She brought the tea to the living room and sat across from her son. You know, I spent most of my life thinking I was just surviving, getting through one day at a time, doing what had to be done. But looking back now, I see that I was building something, a life, a legacy. I just couldn't see it from the inside. Michael nodded slowly. I think that's true for most of us. We can't see the whole picture until we're far enough away to look back. And sometimes it takes the hardest moments to help us see clearly. They drank their tea in comfortable silence, the clock on the mantel ticking softly, the night peaceful around them. When Michael finally left, kissing her cheek at the door, Margaret stood in the doorway and watched his taillights disappear around the corner. Then she went to her desk, pulled out a piece of paper, and began to write. To whoever reads this, she wrote, I want you to know something. Life will knock you down. People will hurt you. There will be days when you wonder why you bother trying. But I promise you, if you can hold on, if you can keep going, if you can remember that kindness is always an option and dignity is always worth fighting for, the day will come when all those struggles make sense. When you'll look back and see the pattern. When you'll understand that every hard moment was building you into someone you couldn't have become any other way. I was thrown bread in a restaurant by a man who thought I was nothing. And that man, without knowing it, set into motion a chain of events that changed thousands of lives, including his own, though perhaps not in the way he would have hoped. The moral of my story isn't about revenge or karma or cosmic justice. It's simpler than that. It's about choice. Every day we choose who we're going to be. We choose whether to lift people up or tear them down. We choose whether to see others as full human beings or as obstacles in our way. Derek Morrison made his choice that night. Elena made hers. Sarah made hers years later when she decided to tell the truth about what she'd seen. And every day, in big ways and small, we all make ours. Choose kindness. Not because it will be rewarded, though sometimes it will. Not because it's easy, because it often isn't, but because it's right. Because the person you lift up today might change the world tomorrow. Because the person you dismiss without a second thought might be carrying burdens you can't imagine. Because everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. And because someday you might be the one in the rain, asking for nothing but a moment of warmth, hoping that someone will see your humanity. Be the person who sees it. With love and hope, Margaret Sullivan. She sealed the letter and set it aside, not sure yet who it was for. Maybe she'd read it at a foundation event. Maybe she'd send it to a newspaper. Maybe she'd just keep it for herself. a reminder of everything she'd learned and everything she still had to give. Outside, the moon had risen over the lake, casting a silver path across the water. Margaret stood at the window and looked out at it, thinking about all the nights she'd stood at other windows, watching the rain, wondering how she'd pay the bills, worrying about Michael, dreaming of a life she thought she'd never have. She'd been wrong about so many things. The life she thought was out of reach had been there all along, hidden in the daily choices, the small kindnesses, the moments of connection that she'd dismissed as insignificant. It turned out that a life didn't have to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It just had to be lived with intention, with purpose, with an open heart and a willingness to see the best in people, even when they didn't see it in themselves. Margaret Sullivan was 66 years old, and she was just getting started. The story of the Golden Fork became something of a legend in the years that followed. It was told at foundation events, in news profiles, in the halls of the restaurant chain that had now become a model for ethical business practices. The restaurant itself had been completely transformed. The white tablecloths replaced with something warmer, the stuffy atmosphere giving way to genuine hospitality, the staff trained to see every customer as a valued guest regardless of their appearance. Elena became the nursing supervisor at the Children's Hospital, eventually earning her master's degree and becoming a beloved figure in the pediatric ward. She never forgot where she came from, and she never stopped being the kind of person who would give a stranger a cup of coffee on a rainy night. Sarah became a social worker, specializing in helping young, single mothers. Her own journey giving her a credibility and connection that no textbook could provide. Emma grew up hearing the story of her mother's transformation, and she carried it with her as she pursued her own dreams, eventually becoming a teacher, passing on the lessons of kindness and perseverance to a new generation. Michael continued to build his company, but his approach had changed. The experience with his mother had crystallized something in him, an understanding that success meant nothing if it came at the expense of basic human decency. He became known in the business world not just for his innovations, but for his insistence on ethical practices, fair treatment, and genuine care for employees and customers alike. And Margaret lived for another 20 years, watching her family grow, seeing the foundation she'd inspired change countless lives, experiencing a joy she'd never imagined possible. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86, she left behind a legacy that couldn't be measured in dollars or awards. Her funeral was standing room only. Elena spoke, and Sarah and Michael, but it was a woman no one recognized who gave the most memorable tribute. She was elderly now, stooped and gray-haired, but her voice was clear as she approached the podium. "You don't know me," she said, "but Margaret Sullivan changed my life. 30 years ago I was a hotel maid, working double shifts, barely making ends meet. I came to one of the first foundation events, back when it was just Mrs. Sullivan and a few volunteers in a church basement. I was so afraid to ask for help, so sure I'd be judged, so convinced I wasn't worth anyone's time." She paused, her eyes wet. Mrs. Sullivan looked at me, really looked at me, like she saw something beyond my worn shoes and my tired face, and she said, "Tell me your story." So I did. I told her about my daughter with special needs, my deadbeat husband who'd left, my mother who was sick and needed care. I talked for an hour, and she listened to every word. When I was done, she took my hand and said, "You're not asking for charity. You're asking for a fair chance. That's something you've earned 1,000 times over." And then she helped me. She connected me with resources, with people, with opportunities I never knew existed. Because of her, my daughter got the care she needed. I went back to school. I became a nurse. The woman smiled through her tears. I've spent the last 25 years paying it forward, trying to be for others what Margaret Sullivan was for me. And I know I'm not the only one. There are thousands of us out there, people whose lives were transformed because one woman refused to look away, because she understood that every person has value, because she treated us with dignity when the world told us we didn't deserve it. She looked at the photograph of Margaret that stood beside the casket, a beautiful image of an old woman smiling, her eyes bright with life. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for showing us what real kindness looks like." She touched the photograph gently. "I'll see you again someday, and I'll tell you all the stories of the people you helped, the lives you changed, the world you made better just by being in it." As the woman returned to her seat, a murmur went through the crowd, and then something amazing happened. One by one, people began to stand. At first, just a few, then dozens, then hundreds, all standing in tribute, all wiping tears from their eyes, all united by the common thread of having been touched by Margaret Sullivan's kindness. Michael watched from the front row, his own face wet with tears, his heart full of a grief that was somehow also joy. His mother had lived a remarkable life. Not remarkable by the standards the world usually celebrated. She'd never been famous, never been powerful, never accumulated great wealth, but she'd been remarkable in the ways that mattered, in her generosity, her courage, her unwillingness to let cruelty go unchallenged, her faith that people could change, could grow, could become better versions of themselves. The service ended and the crowd slowly dispersed, but the stories continued to be told, in the foundation offices and the hospitals and the schools, in the homes of families who'd been helped, in the hearts of people who'd been seen. The story of Margaret Sullivan and the Golden Fork, of a night that began with humiliation and ended with transformation, became one of those tales that people shared when they needed to believe that justice was possible, that kindness mattered, that the choices we make when no one important is watching are the most important choices of all. Because that was the truth that Margaret had discovered, and the truth that she'd spent her life teaching others. Everyone is important. Everyone has a story. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Even a tired old woman in a wet coat, asking for nothing but a cup of coffee on a rainy night. Especially her.